He's very accurate. 18 USC 1182 gives the president specific authority to do exactly what he did in the executive order. There are other provisions in the INA Code, the Immigration Naturalization Authority Code. As you said earlier, precedent with 4 different presidents. He doesn't have to do anything but follow the law that's already in the books to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic. Can you imagine trying to operate in counterintelligence under a regime that we saw a little glimpse of today, the last few days with the judges, how they rule with complete disregard of obvious constitutional and immigration law and make up provisions and rulings? They're basically directives. Can you imagine trying to conduct and protect our country under that kind of imposition of politically correct opinion? Both handcuff and blinder. Well, that started in 2008 with a memo called the Words Matter Memo that was brought up through the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties branch of the Department of Homeland Security. They asked subject matter experts like myself internally before the memo was released in January of 2008 for our opinion about what these directives that were embedded within the memo would actually mean vis-a-vis counterterrorism. I gave them 7 points to consider in terms of the harm it would do to our efforts to call the enemy and use the terms that they themselves use 100,000 times every day. And those comments were ignored. And it went into policy and it morphed into what we know of today as countering violent extremism, where we were basically told that if we name the enemy, it will offend people in Muslim countries and put us at greater risk, which is, if you think about it, they're basically saying if we don't do what they want, they will kill us. And that's really the debate with the immigration issue. They're telling us that we don't have the right to protect our borders, that we don't have the sovereign authority to put American citizens, keep them from harm, and that if we do exercise our constitutional and sovereign rights, they call us nationalists, racists, bigots, Islamophobes. This is a really incredibly important moment we are in history. President Trump has to win this battle, even if it goes to the Supreme Court, because if we allow judges to overrule case law and immigration law, we will descend into anarchy and chaos.
Well, I just love how they sit there with a straight face and say, whoa, fascism, nobody's ever done this, when they know Jimmy Carter, Reagan, right through to him did it. And sometimes they bombed the countries. Sometimes they had larger lists. I mean, clearly, Somalia is a totally failed state that still sells women on slave blocks. Sudan's running a war, decades-long war against the Christians in the South. The only airports there are military bases to attack people. They're projecting force into the middle of Africa and into Kenya. I mean, the countries that they've banned are openly, declaring how they want to blow the United States and Israel off the face of the world. Libya is a failed state thanks to the Hillary Clinton and Obama. Against Yemen, Iraq is a huge war zone. Syria is a war zone. Who in their right mind would take people from war zones with these flimsy, admittedly fake passports? Even the EU, Interpol, I saw last year, said upwards of half the passports that they see coming out of Syria are fake.
Well, that was going to be my next point. I'm glad you brought that up. Aside from all the other arguments, every one of these countries is in chaos administratively. On the one hand, they tell us, for example, when they come from Somalia, that they don't even know when they were born, that all of their records have been lost. Yet on the other hand, they're trying to reassure us that they do robust, thorough vetting, and that we can trust that the paperwork, meaning the visas and the passports that are coming from these countries, are legitimate. So how do we know that? We'd have to take it on faith. And anybody in Customs and Border Protection that does what we call work the line and actually processes passengers every day, or who works in what we call secondary, that does more detailed interviews with people coming from these countries, can tell you that visa fraud and passport fraud is a major problem in our system today. Well, if he blocked them, then he'd have to admit that there was a problem there. And that would contradict the narrative that we've been hearing that his policies in the Middle East have made us safer. Didn't we hear that? Didn't he give a speech before the military and say that we're
He
safer
said the world's
now?
the safest it's ever been, even though every military analyst, this is one thing people are unified on, says the world's in the greatest danger it's ever been.
So if he comes and publicly acknowledges that he should block immigration or travel, at least without a more thorough line of questioning at the primary when they come into the airport, he would be by default admitting that perhaps there's a flaw in his foreign policy.
Sure.
Yes, he does. And then you may remember when DHS was founded in March of 2003, we were called the first line of defense at the border. We actually were given more authority inside the border, like at the airports and seaports, than CIA and FBI combined.
Sure.
If we were allowed to exercise that authority when we interview foreign nationals seeking entry, and that's the formal term, they seek entry. If you have a visa, it doesn't mean that you're automatically admitted to the country. The State Department issues visas. Customs and Border Protection is supposed to interview the people when they come to the port of entry and determine whether there are reasons to prevent them from coming into the country.
And let's write.
Well, I believe that his ideological goals and those who are allies with him supersede any of the concerns we might have about national security, including terrorism attacks and/or disease, because to them, the goal of opening the borders of the United States and letting people in from all over the world is more important than any of the possible threat that they might pose. It's like an equation. On the one side of the equation, you have concern for the political agenda. On the other side of the equation, you have fear of terrorist attacks or concern about terrorist attacks. And I'll leave it to your audience to put in the mathematical symbol between those two equations. Was the Obama administration more, less, or equally concerned about political agenda than they were attack? I think it's pretty clear they were more concerned about the political agenda than they were the threat of an attack.
Well, I would agree.
Well, your premise about mischaracterizing terrorist attacks is not just a vague statement or a theory. It happened in Technicolor with the San Bernardino attack. You might recall that it was characterized initially as a gun issue, remember, about controlling guns. And it was only days, or even in some cases weeks later, that all the details of the case actually finally came out. And we found out that Syed Farouk and his wife, Tashfeen Malik, were actually part of a network of affiliated organizations right here in the United States that preach openly Sharia supremacy, implementation of Sharia at the cost or conflict with the Constitution, up to and including the use of jihad attacks or violent attacks in order to push that program forward. That network has been operating in the United States for 15 or 20 years. And that's why I came forward and I talked about this group called Tablighi Jamaat because the government shut the case down. It had direct bearing on the San Bernardino case.
Philip Hayne.
Well, what we're seeing now is what was going on behind the scenes before. It just hadn't broken out into the visible arena. Now what you're seeing is the same kind of individuals and policies that were contained within the law enforcement agencies prior to the new administration has now broken out into mainstream media. So the attempts to shut down enforcement of the law and so on that you're seeing now in open public was going on for years under the Obama administration. That's basically the theme of the book, is that these kind of things are not new. It actually started with a small group of individuals within law enforcement agencies like Customs and Border Protection, Department of Defense, FBI, and one by one, the administration went after what we call subject matter experts and knocked us off one by one. And once they knocked us out of the picture, then they had an open field to advance these policies. So what we're really seeing now is a collision between the former policies and the attempt by the new President Trump to start implementing what is already supposed to be law and in place and has been for decades.
So Trump's only re-administering the law.
Yes, he referred specifically to 8 U.S.C. 1182, which provides very clearly the option for the president to refuse entry or prohibit individuals from certain countries coming in for the sake of national security. I'll tell you how I see it. If the people who are protesting this action were really honest about their concerns, they would simply say, okay, President Trump, it's a temporary order for 120 days. Let's all get together and study what's going on regarding immigration.
That's right.
They won't even admit that there's a problem, which is exactly the reason why people like myself were always in trouble, because they would never listen to what we said. They would push us, marginalize us. We have what are called adverse actions. We get fired. I had my gun taken, my secret clearance taken away, all access to systems removed, simply because I pointed out the two major groups that we're involved with, the Muslim Brotherhood and another group called Tablighi Jamaat, might pose a threat to our national security.
Now let's talk about.
I literally interviewed a whole group of them, and I call it in the book the Madrasa Boys. I saw them face to face. I watched them grow up from young men into fully mature adults over a 4 or 5 year period. They knew me and I knew them. I would interview them when they came back from Ramadan every year. They were attending a madrasa in South Africa that spoke or taught in English, and I would literally meet them at the gateway of the flight every year when they came back. And we got to know each other, and I learned the way it works. How these young men from America are going overseas, getting trained to become experts in Sharia law and or imams, and how they gradually grew into this persona of people like Tashfeen Malik and Syed Farouk.
Let's talk about.
Well, it went on. It's been going on for quite some time. There's actually a network of madrasas right here in the United States, meaning Islamic schools, that they take young men, 4th, 5th grade, take them out of public school and send them to the madrasas, and they study the Quran. That's all. Until they become what is called a hafiz, a person who has memorized the Quran. And then by that skill, they are qualified to attend, like the madrasa I mentioned in South Africa, where they go through a 7-year program called an Alim program, where they qualify to become an imam. I captured the first generation of American kids, either naturalized or born here, that were going overseas to go through this program. And that's what led me to go to National Targeting Center in Washington, D.C., where we put together a case that generated 1,200 law enforcement actions in the first 9 months of the case.
And by the way,
it's an abrogation of duty. It's putting American citizens at risk. We're not here as law enforcement officers to be popular or be politically correct. Of course, we recognize the importance of human rights and being courteous to everyone that we. That's right, because that's the oath we took, and that's why I'm talking to you now. I took an oath to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic, and I'm obligated by that oath. If I see something, I must say something, and I did. And that's why I called the book See Something, Say Nothing, because that's what they preferred that I would do.
All right, Philip.
There are 3 trigger points or flash points that you can create an imaginary boxes and put what you're seeing in front of us today in one of the 3 boxes. The first one is immigration reform based on the special interest countries. That's the immigration executive order that we just saw with the 7 core special interest countries. That's the first flashpoint. The next one is going to be an attempt to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization and its affiliated front groups operating in the United States like Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, and NAIT, and or redesignating this Countering Violent Extremism program so it's actually effective. That will be your second flashpoint. The third flashpoint is going to be our political relationship with Jerusalem, Israel. whether or not we post the ambassador in Jerusalem and or how we support Israel going forward will be the third major flashpoint. And I hate to tell you this, but the immigration reform flashpoint is the least volatile of the three. Can you imagine, based on what we've already seen, backlash both politically, judiciary, and in the public, what will happen if the Trump administration designates the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group, or some of the known front groups operating here in the United States, or reconfigures countering violent extremism to actually be effective? Wow. And or third one, if we began to have our ambassador or political appointees actually conducting business in Jerusalem, they won't even have to build an embassy there. All they're going to have to do is cross that border into Jerusalem, and it's going to be seen as a violation from the Islamic world. By the way, the Islamic world certainly knows about borders, don't they?
They sure do. Most other countries don't let Christians or Jews in. It's just crazy to see the left trying to destroy the most open, free societies the world's ever seen. America's not perfect. And to quote Merle Haggard, I don't blame somebody switching sides and fighting what they believe in. But when you try to overthrow the Bill of Rights and Constitution, that's not free speech, that's sedition. And that's why I've chosen what side I'm on. Go ahead.
They're not going after President Trump. They're going after us.
That's right.
We had the audacity to express our concern for our borders. A country without borders is not a country. It doesn't exist.
That's globalism. This is world government. Philip, it's been too long. A year and a half is too long. Please give us updates every month. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your book. And I'm going to have my producers get a hold of your folks to carry your book at the InfoWars store. Thank you so much, sir, for your service.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
You know,